everybody, and welcome to another World of Warcraft live developer Q&A. My name is Josh Allen. Joining me, as usual, game director Ian Hazakostas. Ian,
great to be here as always.
Yeah, good morning.
I want to know what's up.
So we have a ton of questions that came in.
I watched some of it today, but I couldn't focus on it.
Topic, which is Azerite armor. I know we've been saying a lot about Azerite armor recently, but just getting some clarifications out here would probably be good.
Sure.
So let's get into it.
720p is the quality? God damn it, man.
During the last update on Azerite armor, you mentioned adding another ring with spec-specific traits only. Will items be set up so that the same trait doesn't appear more than once between the two rings? So we posted recently that the new Azerite gear being added in Tides of Vengeance will have like a fifth ring on the outer edge.
Exactly.
Yeah, I remember they talked about this earlier.
The Battle of Desara lore and the
Is this loud enough for you guys, or do you need me to make it louder?
So yes, there's an extra outer ring that has 2 spec-specific Azerite traits per spec. So that's up to 8 unique traits if you are a druid with 4 specs, 4 if you're a demon hunter, 6 for most people. And no, those will always be different than the single spec-specific trait on what is currently the outer ring. So effectively, you're going to have access to 3 traits out of 6 or 7 total available. This will triple the availability of any given trait. So if you've been looking for, I just really want at least 1 point in this thing that increases the radius of my healing rain or increases the uptime of Demo Shout on my Prot Warrior or whatever, and you've been pigeonholed into just 1 or 2, items that you can seek out, you'll have 3 times as many options, as well as always picking up and opening up, any new Azerite armor that you get with a meaningful choice between 2 spec-specific traits as you go from there.
Okay. It's only the spec-specific traits that are on the outside? It's not the generic, like, dagger in the back and so on?
Exactly. Those. So
basically,
just imagine the current pieces that you're seeing that have, 3 rings in the central node. And those will stay the same. So if there's a piece from a dungeon, that will still have that exact set that
these guys go way overboard with it. I can tell you
right
now, this is going to probably be a fucking hour-long filibuster.
Desara lore is being built to have a new outer ring around it. So it's going to be this 5th outer ring that has between 4 and 8 traits, depending on your class, and only spec-specific ones. So no generics.
Okay. Cool. So that also means that there's no, just to clarify the sort of intent behind the question here, there's no doubling up on the same trait.
Exactly.
Any given piece.
You'll be able to get up to 3 stacks at most if you have the same trait on all 3 of your
Bring it
slots.
up a little bit louder.
That'll still be the case. Except now, getting 3 stacks of the same trait pretty much means that's all you're doing with all of your Azerite gear. Whereas here, you'd still have 3 more trait selections to complement those, whether it's going to stack 3 of a different one or spreading it more evenly to get a single point in a few different ones that don't have stacking components, so you can get some different utility enhancements. Again, the goal here is just
fucking
more
Azerite gear,
customization,
man.
more access to different traits that you want, and more choices.
I mean, some of the traits are cool,
next
but
question came from War.
Some of the traits you just don't need.
Right here, who said, would you consider changing the Azerite system to have traits saved spec-based versus item-based?
Yeah.
Having one set of 380 shoulders is so frustrating to balance between specs that I avoid other content due to reforging. This has been one of the more common
yeah, that makes more sense, because it would be nice to have like a healing-specific Azerite set, and then stack or set my traits based on what I'm doing as a Holy Paladin.
Asking to do the same thing for Azerite armor.
Yeah, so I think set pieces in past expansions were kind of an exception to the standard rules when it comes to items. And the reason why we went down that road was it felt a little odd to literally get the exact same, you need 2 of the same item from the same boss with the same art, with the same name, just to cover both balance and resto or balance and feral. And so having it be a single piece that could change made sense in that context. But that was an exception to the normal standard, where a key difference between character-based things, which can be smoothly and seamlessly changed, and item-based things is that items are a bit more firm, a bit more static. This is, if you look at how most items work, whether you have a one-hand weapon and a shield for your prot spec, but you need a 2-handed.
They're talking about how
trinket based
Azerite
spec
power works with specific with the gear that you get.
If you want to play another spec, you generally want to seek out another item.
And then changing the traits that you get with the gear based on
generic
the
ones. If you have a trinket that is
specialization
just
of the character,
proc secondary or secondary proc primary, that might work for both. And so I think that's sort of our default posture with these items. Now, in many ways, Azerite armor is more flexible than a default item, where if I've collected a full set of tank gear and I want to start DPSing because my raid doesn't need an extra tank anymore, I now can't do that without going out and collecting a whole new set of gear. The fact that you can change the spec, the traits that you've chosen, adds a lot more flexibility. If one of your tanks is going to be out for a couple of weeks and you need to jump in and tank for your raid, you can just spend a few dozen gold if you haven't been respecking much.
I get that,
and
but
shift
I mean,
all your Azerite pieces over to cover that. Or if you're going back and forth regularly,
I did that in vanilla
between two specs.
And Burning
generic
Crusade.
Traits are also there.
Where
as
I'd
an
pay to
option
change
for
my
that purpose.
specialization before they did dual talents.
Something we go back and forth on a lot philosophically, and I completely understand. Obviously, I don't mean to sound dismissive of course it would be simpler if you could just change these seamlessly and you could operate at full effectiveness, whether you're assassination, whether you're subtlety, whether you're outlaw. But to some extent that is deliberate. We think there's value to at least a bit of friction between changing specs and operating optimally in your other spec. I think someone who is dedicated fully to a given specialization, that is who they are, that is what they are, should have some small advantages over somebody who's seamlessly changing between two specs as the need suits them. And some of that is because we're also looking at balance between hybrids and pure classes. It's a druid, a priest, a shaman may not have multiple options if they want to do damage, whereas a rogue, mage, hunter, warlock can, and that's by design to a certain extent. Subtlety rogues might shine on single target encounters, outlaw may do better with cleave and AoE, but in a world where they can seamlessly do both as the need suits them without any loss of efficiency, that is a very difficult advantage to balance against the rest of the game who doesn't have that option available to them. And again, what we're talking about here is just a few percent, right? It's if you want to play a certain spec for, you're trying to do your Mythic Plus for the week, or you're just helping your friends out, or you're jumping into PvP, missing one trait or having a slightly less effective trait, or wearing a 370 pair of shoulders because you don't have a 385 with for the spec that you want, that's going to make you a couple of percent less effective. I get that if you are looking to push, a world first Mythic kill, or top 100 Mythic raid kill, or you're trying to push a Mythic 15 in time, every percent matters. But for the vast majority of the content that you're doing, you're still
you can't compare PvP and
accomplish your
PvE.
goals.
It just doesn't.
And in the long term, as we look to increase the availability of Azerite armor, that's something that should become less punishing in that regard too, right? If you only have one 380, 385, and all of your other pieces in that slot are 340 because you haven't been able to get any others, then swapping that piece out can feel like an unacceptable sacrifice. But I think hopefully with the emissary change that we made recently and increased availability overall, people should find themselves with more options for a given slot.
Okay. And it's kind of thinking over what you're talking about here. It's sort of the sense of, like, say I'm my guild's main tank, right? And I've been devoting all of my gearing and all of my efforts into being the best tank that I possibly can be. I should have a little bit of an advantage over somebody who maybe they play Retribution majority of the time, maybe they play Holy the majority of the time. And I should be a better choice for that tank role in the raid than somebody who's been spending all their time gearing up another spec.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's something that if you decide you want to change specs, over the course of a few weeks, you can get to that point of optimal efficiency.
I mean, I was switching between ret just so that I can get through the content faster.
But it's not something you can do
and give myself an option to survive in the open.
I think in many ways,
and then switch to Holy when it was time for me to do the progression.
I think has led us to make spec switching much easier.
There's no way as a Holy Paladin I would be able to survive out in the open.
How those systems
Holy
work,
shocking everything to death,
You had legendaries that were just for a specific spec and nothing could change those. Or you had your artifact power focused on a single artifact and the others were farther behind. Or you got a Holy Relic drop from a raid boss and you had to decide whether you put it into your Holy Artifact or your Ashbringer for ret, and that was a irrevocable choice. And none of those systems exist in those ways in Battle for Azeroth, but we do, like I said, want to preserve a little bit of friction, a little bit of difference, even if it's just a few percent effectiveness between the full-time dedicated assassination rogue and the rogue who just switches when it feels like that's the best suited spec for a fight in a specific case.
I remember when we were first talking about the Azerite system months and months and months ago at this point, and talking about the reforging aspect of it, one of the original ideas that was being kicked around was, well, maybe you can only reforge one Azerite piece once every week or two or something like that. And we moved away from that because, like, obviously if if you are that Retribution Paladin and then your tank leaves and it's like, okay, well now I have to go protection. It would suck to have to wait 3 weeks to have all of your Azerite gear be suited for protection.
Exactly. And then 3 more weeks.
Yeah, that'd be crazy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That
would be fucking nuts.
That kind of opened up the opposite angle where people were then able to just reforge back and forth constantly, which then those escalating gold costs came in, which actually ties into the next question that we have here, which comes from Turnberry, who says, how does restricting Azerite trait reforging through exponential gold costs improve gameplay? With the new Outer Ring in 8.1, it seems like it will severely punish players who play multiple specs.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I think that this ties directly into the last question.
Playing a hybrid would be shitty.
Was just as you just mentioned, Josh. It was a solution to trying to come up with a way to solve the problem of, if you feel like you need or want to change specs in a long-term sense, that shouldn't feel punishing or overly restricted. Or also even just maybe you got a better piece for your main spec in this slot. You want to turn your other piece into an elemental piece or a shadow piece to use when you're out questing or DPSing. Those should all be like ready options. The thing we wanted to avoid was turning this into just an extra set of talents effectively with a lot more baggage, where on every boss fight, the same way you might use a Tome of Tranquil Mind and move a couple of talents around in your rows, you also felt, okay, I'm going to go respec all of my Azerite traits to be optimal for this fight, then respec them again to be optimal for the next fight. The way the system works, to be clear, is every time you respec, the cost of respecing doubles, but then it also decays pretty rapidly. I think every 3 days, the cost will halve. So what that means, it starts out, I think, 5 gold. So if you've never respec and you want to change all 3 of your pieces that you use primarily from one spec to the other, let's say you're going from Frost Mage to Fire Mage, that's going to cost you 5 plus 10 plus 20, literally 35 gold, which is basically nothing. And then 6 days later, the cost will be back to 5 gold. Now, if you're trying to respec on a very regular basis, if you're trying to do the thing that the system is designed to restrict, you're going to run into prohibitive costs. And I know, you see the exorbitant, the screenshots that seem comical, where someone is posting their, 80,000 gold respec cost. But the only way they got to that point was by paying 40,000 gold for the prior one and 20,000 gold for the one after that.
Why are you spending that much? I mean, are you really respecing that much?
Without respecing, that's going to be down to 1/8 of what it was, and then another week 1/8 of that again, until it's all the way back down to nearly nothing. So the intent.
I don't think I've ever
unlike
seen anyone or heard of anyone specking on a almost daily basis.
Spec. What is your loot
or
spec
changing those traits on such a constant basis that it does that. It's crazy.
Or this is the shield that you got because
it starts at what, 5 or 10 gold?
Here you have the ability to change the items.
80,000.
Not endlessly, not infinitely, not without restriction.
Okay.
Fuck me.
And I know we've floated the idea around at certain points about resetting the cost of the Azerite trait reforging if we do large balance passes, or possibly, obviously there's a whole bunch of changes coming to traits in Tides of Vengeance.
Yes.
Is that something we're still looking into the possibility of doing?
Yes, that's something that we're definitely looking to do. We didn't have the technical ability to do it. We are working on making that possible for Tides of Vengeance, and then once we have that, we could also use it again in the future if we ever make significant changes to a given class's Azerite traits. We could reset your reforging costs the same way back in the day. Talent points would often get refunded when talent changes were made.
Okay, cool.
All right, Zevik, have a good night, dude. Thanks for stopping in, bro.
Comes from Eris, who asked, will there be new traits on Mythic Plus Azerite gear in 8.1 and beyond, or are those of us focusing on dungeons as our only endgame activity stuck with the same ones for 2 years? So talking about, obviously, we've been pretty clear in the past that the traits that are on the Azerite gear are preset. We specifically choose which traits are on each piece of gear. How are we incorporating that into Mythic Plus, where obviously the items don't really change?
Right. So going into Season 2, all the existing items will have this extra ring on them with 2 traits, which will include some of the new traits that are being added in Tides of Vengeance. And then beyond that, I think we'll continue that philosophy going forward. I can't say with certainty how things are going to work in later patches after this one, but the plan is to continue supporting and evolving the system for all of these endgame progression paths, and Mythic Keystones are obviously a huge part of that.
Okay. Cool. Another Mythic Plus question from Korax, who asked, any plans on changing the way to acquire Azerite gear from Mythic Plus dungeons? The fact you can only get it from the weekly chests at the moment is slightly disappointing and frustrating. This has been one of the most common suggestions as well.
And I would say it's arguably more than slightly disappointing and frustrating. It sucks. It sucks. Like, we're not happy with how that works. We are trying to come up with
I agree. It's a little disappointing
for the game as a whole. I think the most common suggestion is we'll just let it drop from end of run chests. And clearly that would give you the ability to target specific pieces. They would still only be 370 as opposed to 385 at the high end.
You're frothing, mate. Thanks, heaps.
Yo, 52-month resub? Holy shit.
Spamming Mythic Plus all week, which is actually a
Man on Fire, thank you very
group.
much for the resub, dude.
Of people do Mythic Keystone Dungeons.
That's fucking insane. Thank you, man.
A handful every week, just one or two to get their weekly chest in, and it complements their other gameplay that they're doing. Others have that as their focus, as their sole activity.
Energy for that guy. Thank you, bro.
Other sources of Azerite armor in the end game have some sort of restriction on how often you can get them. Right? I mean, there's more control if you're raiding Uldir. You know which boss drops the piece you want. You have a
I
chance
just don't
to
like the
bonus roll
RNG
it.
factor. I feel like
But
I'm
at the end of the day,
suffering
there's
by
just that
RNG.
one
It's
shot
like
a
playing
week.
Destiny.
And if you want, maybe Zul drops your helm, you get your one crack at Zul every week. And if he doesn't drop it, he doesn't drop it. Come back again next week. Try again. Same with PvP. You're getting your items either from the weekly, conquest progression, or from your weekly chest. You can't get Azerite armor from your end of match rewards, and so we have concerns about making end of run mythic chests the only spammable way of targeting a specific piece, and what that would do to the comparative value and rewards of all of our different end game tracks. We don't like Mythic Plus is tremendously rewarding. It's the best way, it's the only way really of getting a crack at, a guaranteed 365, 370 level piece of gear on a regular basis, as much time as you want to put into it, compared to, say, heroic raiding, where you only get that one shot a week per boss. But so we don't want to tip that too far in that direction. That's why we haven't done that. That said, the current system is not great. I know that if you are that player whose focus is dungeons, feeling like you only have this one chance a week at getting an Azerite armor piece, and then you also, if you do get one, it's gonna be pulled from this giant pool where you feel.
I wanted to check it out
when it comes to what that piece is gonna be.
I didn't get a chance to check out the Q&A.
That's not a satisfactory place. We are still discussing solutions to this problem. We want to solve the problem. We want to give ways of having more reliable access to Azerite armor if you were a dungeon-oriented player, as well as some ability to target, if there's a specific piece from Temple of Sethralus that you're interested in, we'd like there to be some way for you to express that and pursue that goal. It's an ongoing discussion. We don't have a specific solution to announce right now, but to be clear, the answer is definitely we agree this is a problem. It's a problem we want to solve.
Solve it.
Well, that's good news
Solve
at least.
quickly.
And I can understand how just straight up adding it to Mythic Plus, there's a lot of extra knock-on effects to have to worry about at that point.
Exactly.
So
I think, and again, with a lot of this, if the end game were just Mythic Dungeons, we would do that.
Sure.
But we're trying to create and balance and maintain a holistic end game that has multiple play styles, multiple progression paths, and to keep those balanced against one another. Yeah,
and there's already a lot of players who there'll be a specific trinket or something that they feel like this is the best trinket for me, so I need to farm this one dungeon over and over and over and over and over again until I get that.
I don't like the fact that
a lot of players are okay with that. A lot of players
Azerite is not working.
Adding more of that.
They keep nerfing and changing stuff and have to redo research what is good and what's not. It's never been this bad ever. Rather having them
what's the deal with
disabling the traits in PvP than to having do so much research and farming stuff a week after getting nerfed and having it's a lot. It's a lot of work.
Sorry,
it's really silly.
Third-party sites like Wowhead to explain what they actually do. Resetting I cannot talk. You guys can read it. Resetting traits can quickly reach insane gold costs, so testing on your own is not a good option.
Yes. What, you mean you don't naturally know what the power of the Horde is? And when a trait says it's going to fill you with the power over Spirit of the Horde, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, no.
To me anyway.
We're going to fix those in the next patch. I think that's the specific one in question. I think what it actually does is it has a chance. It drops a random banner that's themed after your own race. So if you're a Horde player, you might see an Orc banner or a Troll banner or a Forsaken banner. Those each have different effects or give you a secondary stat bonus of a different type.
Okay.
And so I think that was just a fallback tooltip from a designer who, it's a whole lot to try to encapsulate in a single tooltip. We're going to revisit the design and the way we express it and make it clearer. It's not reasonable to ask you, we agree, to choose between something vague and something that very clearly says it, procs 3,500 nature damage when you do X, which is at least understandable.
Sounds good. Makes sense. Question from John Has Skittles on Twitter. Said, will you be retiring any of the older traits in 8.1? Right now, it just feels like there's so many of them, and the newer 8.1 traits will end up being so few compared to the older ones. And I know we said previously that we weren't going to, but that's been an ongoing discussion since then.
Yes. So I mean, we're adding a number of new traits that people have been seeing that have started to pop up on the PTR, and you'll see new ones with each upcoming build. But yes, we are also going to be retiring and, in fact, replacing some specific traits across various specs that have just been unpopular, less successful designs. I think there's some that we've looked at that weren't particularly popular, and it was down to tuning, and we could just fix the numbers and it would be fine. There are others where really it was either too simple, was frankly a bit on the boring side, or there wasn't an adequate tuning knob to make it powerful enough to be desirable without breaking
Good
some
timing
aspect
on the
of the
question,
class
yeah.
or rotation. And so we're just going to retire those and introduce new ones in their place.
All right. So let's move on from Azerite. We'll talk a little bit about, we got a couple of class questions in here. We don't normally hit class questions, but there were some pretty good ones that came in. Question here from Anti, who said, are tanks being looked at? It's extremely underwhelming that guilds are mostly looking for brewmasters and DKs because they are way too strong compared to the others. I know that we've been talking a lot with the class team about tank balance. Do we have any updates to share along those lines here today?
Yes. Tank balance is definitely something the team is looking at. We agree that both brewmasters and
I know a
Death
few
Knights
people have
probably have a bit too much in the way of overall
complained about
survivability compared to other tanks. On the other end of the spectrum,
warriors being
Protection
just
Warrior and Guardian Druid feel like they're
trash.
lagging behind.
Druid tanks
is
are a little
numerical tuning.
shitty right now,
Some
too.
of that is also, especially on the side of Prot Warrior, just overall rotational flow.
It's not all that
There
bad,
are
but it's
issues
definitely not
there
as good
that
as it
go
was.
beyond just numbers that are being looked at and discussed, and I think we're hoping to get some changes out to PTR in the not too distant future there. I think at the same time, I think it's also important to frame the discussion of what tanks bring to the picture. And yes, damage taken per second or external healing required, that's a very real metric, and that's one that we want to be relatively balanced overall, recognizing that there's some tanks that are going to be better against magical damage, some tanks that are better against physical damage. There's some different sources and nuances there. But at the end of the day, if you feel like you can't keep tank A alive despite your best efforts, then tank B feels nearly unkillable. Of course, that's going to be a problem and something we need to address balance-wise. That said, beyond that, I think when evaluating tanks, a lot of it also we'd like to be a question of what's their broader toolkit, right? What else are they bringing to a dungeon? What are they bringing to a raid? Whether it's abilities like Death Grip or there are times where something like Spell Reflect was incredibly useful, even situationally.
Oh my god, I remember using Spell Reflect like a fucking
to have that tank present, to have that
loved,
tank represented,
especially in PvP.
And also, finally,
so good.
A lot of the elements that make a tank skilled, I think, aren't quantifiable in terms of the damage taken per second or healing required metrics. I think it's been interesting following discussions. Actually, speaking of brewmasters in this question, I think there's been a lot of interesting discussion in the brewmaster community in the last couple of days over some
what's
some
the
log
TLDR for
analysis
this
and
so far?
comparing
Eon is trash.
damage profiles depending on whether you were keeping your iron skin up as much as you
So
theoretically
far, it just
should
kind of
be,
this
whether
just
you're
feels like a
purifying more at the
fucking
expense of
filibuster
that
right
time,
now, dude. It
and
doesn't
what's
really
the right
like.
way to play, and what are the costs of playing correctly and poorly, and what does that mean for the skill ceiling or the skill floor of a given spec? And again, like the numerical stuff matters, but at the end of the day, I don't think we're trying to make tanking or and to stress our tanks in a way where they're constantly in danger of falling over. I think very rare encounters notwithstanding, or aspects of certain tyrannical bosses or high necrotic encounters in dungeons notwithstanding, feeling like you were doing everything correctly, but
they're pretty much. It seems like they're just kind of forcing things onto the
really
community because they feel it's
mode
what
of
we
gameplay.
want,
It's
but
not
we're
something
telling them what we want,
moved steadily away
or
from
what we
over
feel
the years.
works better. and what would make the game more enjoyable and more rewarding and more desirable to play.
The ability to literally two-shot a tank if they had a bad avoidance.
At least from what I'm getting, is it kind of feels like they're just like, here's all this stuff, and we're like, okay,
healer mana matters.
We don't really like it.
Plays well.
Here's our feedback, and like, okay, well, here's a bunch more stuff, and it's like, all right, this is the same stuff you just gave us, and we told you we didn't really like it, and here's the things that we want.
The gap between
and then
correctly played and poorly played was something like 15% in terms of the
this just kind of feels like a long filibuster so
hand,
far. I don't know.
Some argue, well, that's not a whole lot. On the other hand, I mean, 15% in today's balanced climate. If a spec is 15% behind another, we're consistently told that is, unplayable and useless.
We were just talking earlier about reforging an Azerite trait for like 2% for 80,000 gold. So
But anyway, all of that said, I think the skill in being a tank is often more about just overall battlefield management. It's about positioning, anticipation, taunting that new ad that came in, charging over.
I mean, Azerite's cool and all. I think it's really cool. But the potential of it hasn't even been like, they haven't even given us the tools to actually allow us to break through the ceiling and get the full potential of what it could actually be. You know what I mean? Like, I have to do all this mundane shit that I barely get rewarded for to then level up the gear that I have. It's so ridiculous.
Whereas damage dealing gameplay is often much more quantifiable, and it's just like, hey, how quickly can you kill this thing? How big is your number? I think when it comes to tanks, we're looking to dial in damage taken per second numbers and healing required numbers, but we'd rather continue to expand and diversify the toolkits that they bring that make them great battlefield commanders when they're leading a raid or, leading a group through a mythic dungeon, because I think that's
Josh is probably like, yo, I've seen these questions for the last 8 months, and I want to fucking die because that's literally all I see.
That's part of it.
And he's the face of it too, so he's the one that's got to field all this stuff. Being
a
community manager is not easy.
Talking with the class team the other day also is that we're looking into tank damage as well.
I understand that. Like, I work full time too. I like to play my other classes and my other characters rather. So, which is why I focus on leveling a hybrid, because then it's I can switch specs. I feel like I'm playing a different class entirely.
Spread healers, while other healers excel at both.
Having to do the AP grind all over again from scratch on an alt, considering the amount of time it takes to even get to a reasonable level, is fucking insane.
We have indeed received a lot of feedback. Thank you, Shaman.
Like, the game is not alt friendly at all. So I have 3 level 120s, and only one of them is mythic ready. The other, and I'm sorry, I have 2 of them that are mythic ready. The other one is just kind of like chilling.
Couple issues here. I think it's accurate
that
Shaman excel when there are stacked clumps of people. I think, their signature spell has been Chain Heal for a long time. When Healing Rain was added to their toolkit, that kind of cemented them as a healer that thrives in environments where people are going to be clumped in predictable locations, which comes up a whole lot in a wide range of encounters. But then on the other hand, you have your mythic fetid devourers and other things where people are forcibly spread out, and it's correct that they are less effective there in terms of.
I don't know if you heard, but Josh was saying on Twitter that people are retarded and that they have stupid questions.
An undergeared healer of a different spec that's someone's alt than a very well-geared skilled.
Did he really say that?
That's something that we need to fix, and so I'm not sure that that's a question of massive spec or talent redesign.
No way. Do you have to tell me? Get a link to the tweet. I got to see it.
Spells, strengthening your throughput if you are just using more Riptides and more single target heals versus Chain Heal and Healing Rain. Also, I think with Resto Shaman in particular,
or send it to me on Twitter. That's fucking hilarious.
There's the talent row, like, you feel like you probably want to take Ascendance to do dungeons, which means that you don't take High Tide, which means that the way it's tuned currently, Chain Heal is, like, basically, if you don't have High Tide, you probably shouldn't be using Chain Heal as a spell very much, which significantly limits your toolkit there. So I think there are definitely changes you want to make on that front. On the other end of the spectrum, I think there are definitely a couple of healers that are too effective right now that are also kind of overshadowing others as a result. I think it's a problem that Shaman feel like, even in their situations that are optimal for them, they're still often coming out behind, say, Disc Priests. Disc Priests are something that really very much emerged in the last month.
This year's my first BlizzCon, and WoW
in particular. It's interesting.
WoW is so underwhelming that I'm probably not even going to go to any of their events.
Behind Holy and faring, they're still very strong.
Also, not impressed with the goodie bag.
Closer to the middle of the pack, closer to the average.
Yeah, it was just like one in-game item, right? It's not like an actual.
And this is also spilling over into PvP.
I still have a Stein from last year. the year before.
They have the potential to do
that shit was cool.
More throughput than other healers while doing a fair amount of damage and being very versatile. Yeah, that's a problem. Like we clearly, if one class has strengths and weaknesses, and there's another class that's more of a jack of all trades, the jack of all trades shouldn't beat the first class in the areas of their strength, or we have a balance problem. That's one that we're looking at fixing. And again, the tank stuff, the healer stuff, I think at this point, we're likely going to be targeting this upcoming Tides of Vengeance update for those changes. We don't want to, guilds and groups have their comp solidified. They've geared up certain classes at this point. They've learned many encounters relying on certain classes. We don't want to just hotfix change that out from under you, and we'd rather give a lot of advance notice as we head towards a major patch.
Right.
So I think those are the things that we're looking to address. Now, all of that said, and I know, just I guess another philosophical note. I think again, healing per second matters a ton, but I think it's also these days overrated a little bit or overstated in importance compared to damage per second for a damage dealer. I think there have always been historical comparisons between a damage reduction cooldown and something like Tranquility, right? If you are relying on Devo Aura or the equivalent, well, that's not reflected in healing logs, whereas, the Divine Hymn or Trank, that is. And yet they're both actually absorbing significant amounts of damage, reducing significant amounts of damage. There are other aspects to why you might want a certain healer present that, again, aren't reflected in who has the highest HPS. On the Shaman front, Spirit Link.
Look, if I know I'm doing a certain amount of HPS and I'm staying on top of the meters, I couldn't care less.
Some, giving it to others, and then reducing some incoming damage.
If I'm doing a minimum 10k
heals, your overall healing throughput,
then I know I'm doing all right.
Probably the best healing cooldown in the game in most situations. That's a huge reason to have a Resto Shaman present. Or, in a couple different talent rows, you very commonly see people take damage reduction totems like Earthen Wall that are reflected in healing meters versus Ancestral Vigor that's increasing the health of your targets by 10% on a max health basis that may save lives when you're Riptide that's going on somebody who's taking damage. You're now giving them a larger health pool. You're buffering them against something that otherwise would have killed them. That's a great reason to have a Shaman present, but if all you're looking at is who generates the highest healing per second on a sustained basis, those things aren't captured there.
Right.
And so maybe we can do a better job of trying to surface or message those in ways that are clearer to raid leaders, to pug leaders who are trying to evaluate who they should bring. And finally, sorry, I know I'm kind of rambling here.
Yes, bro.
That doesn't mean none of what I said should be taken to mean that we don't think there are numbers problems as well. There also are those, but it's we want to take a multifaceted approach to the problem.
Okay. Question from Hex Zero, who said the current PvP meta of everybody having tons of self.
Yeah, they're like talking like this. They're like moving around and talking to everybody.
Has left quote unquote rock classes in the dust. Unholy DKs and affliction.
Tons of self heal plus
useless.
insane burst damage healing
Any
control
plans
to address
left
for rock classes.
And I know that we posted a few weeks ago that we were looking at Unholy DKs and affliction warlocks. Do we have any updates on what's going on there?
Yes, so I think some of that is, and this isn't a direct response to this, I know their survivability is definitely something that's on our radar also. Like, those are lower mobility specs, lower mobility classes that we want them to feel a bit tankier. And so currently it often feels like you might just get tunneled and not really have much recourse in those situations. We'd like to help on that front. Now, the overall pacing of arena matches is something that we're definitely looking at. We think it's important that there be room for pressure comps as well as burst comps. And if your goal is just to steady attrition, wearing down healer mana until you eventually can line up a kill, that should be a viable approach. Now, on the affliction lock side too, some of that is down to affliction historically has been that like spread dot pressure spec. Some recent changes in BFA made them a bit more single target oriented, which we've seen in other parts of the game too. And I think that's not totally consistent with our vision or I think players' expectations of what affliction locks should be about. We'd like to pull them a bit more towards that multi-dotting place.
People play affliction locks?
Known for. Anyway.
Ooh, that voice crack.
Also, yes, all of this is on our radar. I think at this point also trying to
struggle.
To strike a balance between rapid reaction to things that we see coming out of weekend tournaments or trends at the high end of the ladder, but also letting the metagame evolve, letting comps establish themselves, letting counter comps rise to counter those. And I think there's risk of too much ongoing, constant change, buffing and nerfing and buffing and nerfing that can stop a meta from ever really settling out. We have, this is Battle for Azeroth PvP Season 1. There are several to follow, and if at the end of the day this season is known more for a faster pace and for higher burst overall, but in a later season or in a subsequent season that starts to shift a little bit, I think that may be a valid approach for us to take rather than trying to just change the meta out from under people. But yeah, philosophically, we definitely agree there should be room for pressure and rot comps and not just, lining up burst and securing a kill that way.
Burst is fun, though.
Sources of healing, like survivability, hybrid healing especially, are something that we are looking to continually and more actively, I think we have been via hotfix and will continue to dial back. And that's something that also, can help overall, raise the effectiveness of steady pressure when you don't have all of this healing coming from different sources, and instead more of that is leaning on a single healer with a fixed mana pool to try to cover.
Okay, cool. And as for the changes that we were talking about for Unholy Death Knights and Afflictional Locks a few weeks ago, keep an eye out on the PTR for those, actually. I believe from what I was talking with the class team about, the decision ended up being that they needed more than just some basic numerical tuning. So keep an eye out for, I believe they're looking into some changes for honor talent. So keep an eye out for that on the PTR. Also, I thought I had a question here about Shadow Priest. I don't, but Shadow Priest, we're looking at you too. So yes, don't worry about that. Well, I mean, continue worrying about that. Continue giving feedback, but keep an eye out. Anyway, I got some questions about Warfronts here. This one comes from Trivia Cow, who says, Moo. Obviously.
Of course. Thank you, Trivia Cow.
Yep. Will the new Warfront run its cycle in parallel with the current one? So instead of waiting 3 to 4 weeks for a new cycle, you start a new one every 1 to 2 weeks. I'm talking about the new Darkshore Warfront coming in, Tides of Vengeance.
Yes, so yeah, the current plan is...
this guy is putting the mic inside of him.
We want to kick off Tides of Vengeance with Alliance attacking Darkshore right away. So not even contributing to attack, but day one, if you're Alliance, you can jump in, do the intro quest, queue for
They need to put a headset on him.
There. And so effectively with this cycle of 2 areas that are now contested, 2 pieces of outdoor content, there'll be Warfront availability twice as often. You might find yourself currently being able to queue for the Arathi Warfront and do that, while also having access to Darkshore and the outdoor quests and world boss there, and then that will flip-flop, but over time basically doubling the amount of availability.
Okay, and it's not like a hard set, like when Arathi is attackable for Horde, then Darkshore is attackable for Alliance, but just starting it off in a way that makes sure that at least initially there's some sort of
exactly. And I think they'll both have their independent contribution cycles. I think the way it naturally works. I think we saw this a little bit with the buildings in Broken Shore and 7.2 last expansion. If there's 2 bars to fill, people naturally gravitate towards the one that's closest to filling, which will make it so that yes, technically they could both be active at the same time. In practice, they're very likely to cycle back and forth and be more staggered, so that it has an organic feel to it. It's not a rigid, like, okay, now that we're attacking Arathi, it's your turn to take Darkshore.
Right.
But the overall feel is likely to be that you're probably going to be attacking one and defending the other at any given time.
Okay. Question from Bullis, who said, any comment on why we still can't queue as raid groups for the Warfronts? This has been a pretty common request.
That would be nice to get a 20-man group.
So this was a decision that was made about midway through Warfront development during beta in BFA, and it's about just the overall pacing of the Warfront experience. And we did internal playtests with full raid groups, and what we found was, while we had a lot of positive feedback and positive experiences when it was solo players or small groups getting together, it actually wasn't a whole lot of fun for large groups. The reason for that is it's not a tuning concern, right? We let you queue with an entire raid group if you want for LFR, and you can take your heroic raid guild and steamroll an LFR wing in 10 minutes flat. And yeah, it's not particularly hard, but if you want to trivialize content, fine, go ahead, go nuts. The problem with Warfronts is that with a full raid group working together with a couple of tanks supporting healers, full 20-person communication, what often happened was you would just steamroll the map objectives and get very far ahead of the pacing of the other base building, resource collection, other mechanisms. it's kind of like a giant version of something like Hellfire Assault or other similar gauntlet.
So essentially, if you get a 20-man group,
if your DPS is too far ahead of the pacing of the encounter, it makes the encounter less fun.
The encounter just takes
why we
forever.
didn't do it was not it would be too easy. It was just a less fun experience. And so in practice, we've focused on making
Thanks,
it
Legacy. Have a good night, bro. Enjoy.
Random queued. You can take a few friends in and focus on objectives. And overall, what we've seen with the pacing of how it plays out online,
I'll check it out, man. On fire. Thanks,
length, just
Appreciate
around
that.
the time you're typically taking over most of the middle of the map is around the time you've probably got your armory, got your.
I mean, that
workshop
makes
up,
sense, but
building
then in
those
that
siege
case, why
engines, and
can't they
you're ready to go
just
finish the map.
adjust the
If
tuning
you
of
had the
the
whole map controlled,
scenario
you have to wait
when
15
you
minutes
queue with a
for
certain
all
amount
your
of
siege
people?
engines to build? That's just not a super fun experience. All that said, totally get there's desire and things are more exciting when you can play them with a large group of friends, and so that's something we've been talking about. How and when we can add a new mode for the existing Warfronts that is actually tuned around a raid group. Whether we call this a heroic version of the Warfront or whatever remains to be seen. But this is something we'd like to deliver. But the initial experience
That'd be cool. But the problem is if they treat it the same way they treated
was
Expeditions, it's
focused
going to
and
be
tuned and
fucking
paced around
miserable.
just mass accessibility for the average player who is just queuing with a few friends or just solo queuing. We wanted to make sure that we could nail the pacing for that without worrying about oops, there's also a 10-player raid group in here who just steamrolled the whole map, and now people are overall feeling like they're having less fun.
Okay, so current Warfronts geared around or designed around the notion of everybody in there is most people in there are completely pickup, but looking at the potential of adding some more raid-tuned Warfronts in the future. Cool.
That'd be cool.
Got a couple questions about allied races here.
Mm-hmm.
First one comes from Genka, who says, do you have any plans to readjust the Death Knight starting area / questline for the introduction of new allied races?
So, not currently. I think currently, allied races, many of them have their own little self-contained starting experiences. Their story fits very directly into Battle for Azeroth's narrative arc. That said, completely understand that if Death Knight's your favorite class, or you play a Death Knight and you've just unlocked this race that you really want to be, you want to be a Void Elf Death Knight or a Magcar Death Knight, not having that option available at all kind of sucks. And so we don't have any plans to announce right now, but that's definitely something we do want to address in the future.
Okay. Question from Thomas, who said, are there any plans to relax the unlock requirements around the Legion allied races? So Nightborne, High Mountain, Lightforge.
Yes, so we have some. So in in the next, so in Tides of Vengeance, the upcoming content patch, we are I think roughly doubling the amount of reputation awarded by the various old world quests. So you can get your Augustian Reach rep, you can get your Army the Light rep twice as fast as you could previously.
Yeah, that's nice.
To, just kind of speed those along now that they're not really content that anyone's doing for any reason other than going back to unlock.
Yeah, it's literally the only reason why I've gone back to High Mountain.
That's good news.
Yes, it's wonderful news.
Let's just move on. Next question. We got a few questions.
On to the next one.
More rating focus. This one comes from Sicarius, who says, "How do you think the siege of
I wonder if they actually field some of these questions before they answer them.
Race, since Horde and Alliance will have
like they look at the stuff like 2 hours before the fucking.
So when we did the
stream,
the Tides of Vengeance sort of reveal stream a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about Siege of Zelda. Well, you were talking about Siege of Zeldazar and how it's kind of two stories being told from opposing sides.
You're frothing, mate. Thanks, heaps.
Thanks, Stance. I appreciate that, bro.
World first race.
So, I guess, a couple things.
Welcome back, my dude.
As of now, we're currently actually thinking that we're going to call the raid Battle of Dazara Lore. Because, technically it's not a siege. It's this naval pincer attack from both sides, unlike Siege of Orgrimmar that was, this whole assembled army in front of the gates. Also, Zuldazar is the entire zone. It's not like the actual capital city. The pyramid that's being attacked is Dazara Lore. So we'll see. We'll name still under discussion, but that's what we're currently thinking. Raid layout. So the current thinking is actually the 9 bosses that exist may actually be faced in the same order between the two factions. That is to say, for Alliance, they may play through the entire battle up to facing Rastakhan, and then have the recap of what they missed told through the eyes of a survivor of the Horde attack and the naval battle with Jaina once they complete that. Whereas for Horde players, they may actually
you gotta like work on
actually in the middle of the raid,
taking the fucking mic out of your mouth, dude.
find what's happened to him, and then are told, hey, this is what the Alliance did before you got here. Here's how that played out, before they then resume and finish off their version of the story.
Okay.
So in practice, boss 9 effectively may be the same boss for both factions. That said, there are going to be some mechanical differences. There are going to be some differences here between the two experiences. And, I know that will cause some debate over, does the world first really matter if this was different than what the other faction was doing? I think I trust the community to figure that out. And if the answer is, hey, for this tier, we're going to say there's a Horde first and there's going to be Alliance first, and people can argue over which one was real or which one was more, impactful, so be it. I think, the world first race is something that, is obviously it's intriguing. It's always amazing seeing.
Well, I guess
very,
technically,
very
yeah.
if
The raid isn't, if the same, if the encounters aren't the same for both factions, then it should be an Alliance world first and a Horde world first. 100%.
We're building our raids to present an epic experience, to tell a story.
Plus, that could kind of help you differentiate. Here's the best Horde raiding guild, and here's the best Alliance raiding guild.
Millions of players, and we're always going to prioritize the depth of that experience.
That would be nice.
Over the nuances of the race. While it's something that we take into account, we wouldn't throw out an otherwise, I think, pretty cool idea to really deliver this asymmetrical faction experience through raiding, just because it might cause some controversy over who the real world first was.
Yeah, it'll still be an exciting world first race pretty much regardless as well. So we'll have to see. I think it's interesting, like, looking at this. The world first race isn't something that Blizzard created. Like, that was something that the community sort of bandied around. And it was really the community that created the world first race and developed it into what it is nowadays.
Imagine if Method got both Horde and Alliance world first. Holy shit! I bet you that's exactly what they're planning to.
And the official Hall of Fame that we now have on our website has a separate Horde section, separate Alliance section. So.
Question from Jarthan, who said, raid trinkets in Uldir have been terrible in comparison to other trinkets outside of the raid with no changes. Can we expect better tuning in 8.1, or do we need to keep hoping for higher Titanforge trinkets from Mythic Plus or World Quests?
Shit.
So, yes, hopefully we can expect better tuning.
I wouldn't know. I had to get
here and there
a trinket from Dark Moon.
Or, the
still haven't got any trinkets from Uldir.
An exciting new crop of them. It's something we've actually, we agree. We look at the same data, and we're looking at the same sims, and understand that increasingly the community values a lot of trinkets from dungeons or even from world quests or emissaries. Theoretically, if you could get them to Titanforge high enough over raid trinkets, we've asked ourselves, why is that? I think part of the conclusion that we've come to is that it has to do with how we're building and budgeting those trinkets, and there are adjustments we can make there to our philosophies going forward. I think raid trinkets we try to make deliberately more interesting. We try to, they're often more flavorful, often directly themed after boss abilities of the boss that drops them. And so, while a world quest trinket might just be its strength, proc crit, the raid trinket might be your attacks have a chance to inject the target with some toxin, and when it reaches this number of stacks, it explodes and does a certain thing. The key difference is that latter effect often is fixed in its throughput, and there aren't as many interactions with player action or player skill. Whereas when we just say we're giving you a lot more primary and secondary stat, whether it's a stat stick or a proc trinket, if you are if I am twice as good a player as you, if I do 15,000 DPS and you do 8,000 DPS with the same gear, that trinket is also going to be more effective for me than it is for you. Whereas the flat proc damage trinket, or has a chance to trigger an AoE effect that has a flat amount of damage, will actually do an equal amount of damage for both of us. And the sims that are used to guide a lot of gearing decisions these days are assuming optimal gameplay. They're assuming you're fighting Patchwork or you're fighting an AoE set of targets and playing perfectly. And so those passive stat trinkets are given their full theoretical possible value that many players
there really hasn't been much discussion about
but those are being compared against
the PvP aspect of the game too.
It's very high.
This is Battle for Azeroth, but we're raiding.
And so it may just we don't want to stop making interesting and flavorful raid trinkets. I mean,
sure,
we could solve this problem by just saying raid trinkets are mastery proc int and crit proc strength and leave it at that. Instead, I think we just need to revisit our tuning philosophies and the way we build some of these
Battle for
to make sure that they are still comparable to the best ones out there. I think we obviously can do this. It's just a question of numbers, right? Draft of Souls was in Legion was a triggered unused damage effect. But if the number's high enough, it can be good enough. We just need to better calibrate how we're making them.
Okay. Question from Jugs, who said, raiding has lost its uniqueness with the removal of tier sets, endgame weapons, and trinkets also coming from Mythic Plus, etc. Any plans to bring uniqueness back to raids?
Oof.
I mean, obviously, there's the unique aspect of there's significantly more people and the encounters are significantly more involved. But talking about like the specific itemization in raids, is there any?
Yes, for sure. I mean, and obviously, and there are titles and there are unique gear sets, and there are things you can get from raiding that you can't get elsewhere. I think definitely, it used to be a long time ago that the only way to get good end game loot was raiding. Period, and there were no alternative sources.
Yeah, why not?
The so-called raid or die era. We've moved away from that deliberately, and I think there's a ton of people who.
All right, man, on fire. Be good, bro. Thanks for stopping by.
On hard
Appreciate
content with a small group of friends, but at the same time, we want to make sure that there is still something special and rewarding for those who enjoy getting together a larger group of people and dealing with raiding. Tier sets were a piece of that, though honestly, I don't know that they really fit the bill there either in the long run. If you look at a tier like Antorus, many people could jump into pugs and relatively quickly get their set pieces at a certain level, get those set bonuses within the first few weeks of doing the raid, especially if you're in a better guild that's clearing that content early. The set pieces didn't feel like the long-term goal that they once had, like way back, a decade ago in classic days, where it might be a year-long journey to get your full, 10 storm set together. The tier pieces in Legion and Warlords and Mists were something that you probably got within a few weeks. And then after that, well, what was the thing that differentiated raiding from the rest of the game for the whole rest of the tier? So, yes, we this is something to think about. It's something that we'd like to do more regarding. It's something we're looking at, itemization, flavor. Just because we don't have 4-piece formal sets doesn't mean we can't have smaller sets, like little 2-piece sets here and there, or items with flavorful effects like Drape of Shame from Karazhan or the Anchor Chain Girdle, things like that have come from dungeons.
It would be nice, though, man. I feel like my Holy Paladin just doesn't feel like a Holy Paladin,
Yes, if you're looking to get your item level up, there's equal progression paths, but each one of these systems should offer some unique and flavorful rewards that aren't available in the others that help differentiate folks who focus on one from folks who focus on the other.
Okay. Starting to run out of time here, so we're going to move on a little bit here. Question here from Tyrus, who said, any concrete plans to make island objectives more varied? Current structure is just AoE and mine your way to the finish.
Yep. Obviously, getting Azerite is always going to be the objective of Island Expeditions. The thing we're looking to vary significantly is just how you get that Azerite. I mean, killing rare spawns and killing creatures is always going to be part of the overall experience, but we're looking to add a lot more unique objectives and events that you can come across on those islands. So, one example of a new thing in Tides of Vengeance is extraction points, where you can take that point over and set up an Azerite extractor for your faction that will actually give you a steady trickle of Azerite for the duration of the map.
What about the reward?
Taking it away from you. That's just one example of.
I'm skipping through most of this shit because it just fucking.
Okay. Question here from Nayrok, who said, "You said that RP servers would not be affected by cross-realm sharding. Yet I've seen many servers sharded into Emerald Dream. What's going on?"
Okay, so the way RP servers work is, except for the new game was back in the day,
we don't really give a shit about role playing.
Satisfying PvP experience.
Question here. See how much time we got. We can probably do 2 more questions here.
Eon's like, no, I'm fucking done, dude.
It comes from Wasselin, who says, you hinted at a change to the group finder for Mythic Plus, such as being able to search by key level. Are those still in the works?
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's there's just some design questions we're still working through there in terms of.
Yes, they got to design
it. There's a few at
the 5th follower takes a while.
Yeah.
Any plans to make it more alt friendly?
Yes, I think so. In general, alt friendliness is a topic that we've discussed a lot for the upcoming content update, because we know a lot of folks are looking to get caught up and getting more alts to max level. So there's a few aspects to this. On the war campaign side, currently, when you finish those individual story chapters, they actually give you hardly any reputation at all, and all your reputation comes from world quests, one-time bounty boards,
Yeah, you get
emissaries.
dick.
We're actually adding significant amounts of rep to those war campaign chapters, kind of like we did to the Suramar storyline back in Legion,
Right.
so that just finishing one will, catapult you pretty close to being able to unlock the next, and so be able to more sequentially play through them, especially since we're adding new war campaign chapters, to the story in Tides of Vengeance.
Yeah, you gotta
Separately,
give them a
other,
buffer.
Other catch-up things we're looking at, we know that with Horde and Alliance assaults coming to the shores of Kultiris and Zandalar, there's going to be new ways to level alts outside of the usual questing route. We've recently improved Island Expedition experience, and so we're seeing characters that are hitting max level through those methods that can end up in slightly awkward situations in terms of what is
but I'd like to
available
get
from
more
the
actual
world.
better
Another problem
rewards
we have to
doing
solve there
the
is actually
Island
flight
Expedition, so
paths.
that's all right.
I think we're currently working on making a BOA book that lets your max level characters learn all the flight paths that you've unlocked on your other characters, so that again, if you've leveled through Island Expeditions, cool, you just hit 120, you have world quests unlocked on your account, you want to go do a Mythic Zero dungeon, or you want to go do world quests, having to spend 2 or 3 hours just literally riding around the entire world, re-unlocking every flight path, not a super fun experience. It's not an issue if you're leveling naturally through questing, but if you're not, it's something we want to fix. So things like that and more, we're definitely looking to do more to improve the alt experience overall.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for being here today.
All right. Well,
yeah. Thanks everybody who submitted questions.
Appreciate it. They didn't answer my question, but that's all right. That's a little scary, but at the end of the day, that's just how it is, I guess. We'll have to wait and see what happens in the content update, All right. In that note, I'm going to wrap it up here. Perfect timing. Perfect timing. Thank you guys so very, very much for hanging out with your boy tonight. I really do appreciate it. I'm going to play this dubsteppy music, let it wrap up. I will catch you guys tomorrow, Friday night, shenanigans, most likely with the homies. Appreciate all the resubs today, dudes. Thank you very, very much for the support. I think we're just sitting a little bit over 30 subs at this moment. Appreciate that. That's awesome. I thought we were going to have like a full-blown fallout after September, but hey, we're doing all right. Again, guys, appreciate all the support and all the love you guys give me every fucking time I come out and stream. Enjoy the rest of your night, and I'll finally see you on Friday. Enjoy your weekend. So, yeah, until then, boys, have a good night. See ya.
Fragment.